Today we are going to look at the most horrifying moments in live TV history. From a teenage girl whose innocent study session became a nation's nightmare to a veteran journalist whose final shot captured his own tragic end. It was October 13, 2008, in Santo André, São Paulo, Brazil, and 15-year-old Eloa Cristina Pimentel was at home working on a school project with her friend Nayara Rodriguez da Silva and two male classmates. The afternoon study session was meant to be routine preparation for upcoming exams, with textbooks and notebooks scattered across the small apartment's dining table. Eloa was a bright student with dreams of becoming a teacher, her warm smile and infectious laughter making her popular among her peers at the local high school. The cramped apartment on Rua Antonio Cardoso had become Eloa's sanctuary after her family moved there 3 years earlier. Her mother worked double shifts at a local textile factory to support them, often leaving Eloa to care for her younger siblings while maintaining excellent grades. Despite the financial struggles, Eloa remained optimistic about her future, spending hours tutoring younger students and volunteering at the neighborhood community center. Her teachers consistently praised her maturity and dedication, seeing in her the potential to break the cycle of poverty that trapped so many in their working-class neighborhood. The relationship with Lindenberg had begun when Eloa was just 11 years old, an age gap that should have raised immediate concerns among adults in their community. What started as innocent childhood affection had gradually transformed into something darker as Lindenberg's possessive tendencies emerged. Friends and family members later recalled how he would become jealous when Eloa spoke to other boys, monitoring her activities and demanding to know her whereabouts at all times. When Eloa finally found the courage to end the relationship at age 13, Lindenberg's behavior became increasingly erratic and threatening. But that afternoon, their quiet study session took a dark turn when Eloa's 22-year-old ex-boyfriend, Lindenberg Fernandez Alves, suddenly entered the apartment with a firearm. The relationship had ended 2 years earlier when Eloa was just 13, but Lindenberg had never accepted the breakup. Reports later revealed he had become obsessed with her, unable to move on from their teenage romance that had grown increasingly possessive and unhealthy. Lindenberg let the two boys leave but kept Eloa and Nayara inside, starting a hostage situation that would last 5 days and be broadcast across Brazil. Police quickly responded, with the Special Tactical Actions Group, known as GATE, taking over and beginning negotiations, hoping to resolve the situation peacefully. The next evening, Nayara was released unharmed, but 2 days later, police made a surprising and dangerous move. They asked the 15-year-old to go back into the apartment, saying her presence might help calm Lindenberg. As the situation dragged on, media attention exploded. News outlets provided live updates day and night, and the case became a national obsession. Things went even further when Rede TV journalist Sonia Abro called Lindenberg live on air while he was still inside with the girls. She spoke with both him and Eloa, and the call was broadcast to the whole country. Legal experts later said the call interfered with the police operation, with a civil case filed against Abro, accusing her of putting lives at risk. By October 17th, the standoff had gone on for over 100 hours. Police said they heard gunshots and decided to break in. GATE, along with military police shock troops, forced their way inside. Lindenberg resisted, and during the struggle he used the firearm. Nayara was injured in the face but managed to leave the apartment alive. Eloa was hit twice, once in the head and once in the lower body. Cameras were rolling as she was carried out unconscious and taken to a hospital, but she didn't survive. On October 18th, doctors declared her brain dead at 11:30 p.m., and she was removed from life support. Her organs were later donated and saved 7 lives. Around 10,000 people attended Eloa's funeral. Nayara survived and went through a long recovery, and in 2018, she was awarded 150,000 Brazilian reais in damages after the court found the state responsible for what she had gone through. Lindenberg was sentenced to 39 years and 3 months in prison, and to this day, Eloa's story remains one of Brazil's most disturbing and tragic cases. It was September 27, 2007 in Yangon, Myanmar, and for 10 days, crowds had taken to the streets in peaceful protest. Buddhist monks in red robes led the demonstrations, walking calmly and chanting for freedom. What began as protests against rising fuel prices had become something much bigger. People were now calling for democracy, frustrated with poverty, military rule, and the lack of basic rights. In the middle of all this was 50-year-old Kenji Nagai, a Japanese journalist who had arrived just 2 days earlier. He worked for a small outlet called APF News, and Kenji had spent years reporting from dangerous places: Afghanistan, Iraq, Palestine. His mission was always the same: go where others wouldn't and show what was really happening. He was known for his dedication to capturing the truth, no matter the personal risk involved. Kenji's colleagues often described him as fearless but never reckless, a man who understood the weight of documenting history as it unfolded. His small apartment in Tokyo was filled with awards and photographs from conflict zones around the world, each image telling a story of human suffering and resilience that mainstream media often overlooked. Despite offers from larger news organizations, Kenji remained loyal to APF News, believing that independent journalism was crucial for exposing injustices that powerful governments preferred to keep hidden. The veteran war correspondent had developed an almost supernatural ability to sense when situations were about to turn violent, a skill that had kept him alive through countless dangerous assignments. His camera equipment was always within arm's reach, and he had trained himself to continue shooting even under the most extreme circumstances. Friends back in Japan worried about his increasingly dangerous assignments, but Kenji felt compelled to bear witness to the struggles of oppressed people worldwide, viewing his work as a sacred duty rather than just a profession. That morning, Kenji stood near the Sula Pagoda in downtown Yangon, the area full of protesters waving flags with the peacock symbol linked to Aung San Suu Kyi's political party. Despite the tense mood, the crowd remained peaceful until military trucks showed up. Soldiers got out holding rifles and shields, and protesters stayed put, some yelling at the troops. The military government saw these gatherings not as peaceful, but as a direct threat, issuing a clear warning: leave in 10 minutes or face the consequences. Then came the military's response. First tear gas, then gunfire, first into the air, then directly into the crowd. Kenji kept filming, his last recorded words caught on camera: "The army has just arrived. The army is over there. They are heavily armed." Then the shooting began, and Kenji was hit and fell to the ground. Even then, witnesses say he continued to hold up his camera, trying to document what was happening around him. A photo by Reuters photographer Adres Latif captured a haunting scene. Kenji lying on the ground, a soldier standing over him with rifle in hand, his camera still in his grip. In the next frame, the soldier walked away and Kenji didn't move again. At first, the Myanmar government claimed he had been caught in the crossfire, but video evidence later showed the truth. A soldier had pushed Kenji to the ground and shot him at close range. An autopsy in Japan confirmed this. The bullet had gone through his chest, hit his heart, and exited from his back. Kenji was the only foreigner to lose his life during the protests, with at least 9 others also dying. News of Kenji's death shocked people in Japan, with the government demanding answers that never came. Myanmar later apologized, but no action was taken. In 2023, 16 years later, journalists said they had received Kenji's missing camera from someone who wanted to set things right. The camera was returned to his sister, and that final footage showed the protests, the chants, the chaos, and Kenji's final moments. No one has ever been held accountable, but Kenji's work hasn't been forgotten. The Burma Media Association created the Kenji Nagai Award to honor journalists in Myanmar. It was sometime in 2003 during an episode of Consejo de Mujeres, a Mexican daytime talk show aimed at women. The program typically covered topics like lifestyle, health, and beauty, and occasionally featured live animals for educational segments. On this particular day, 2 animal handlers from a local zoo were invited to introduce a young lion cub as part of a segment about wildlife conservation. The handlers were seated with the lion between them, and nearby, a mother sat holding her young daughter, who was calmly enjoying a lollipop while looking around the studio. Everything seemed fine. Despite being a cub, the lion was already large and powerful, sitting on a leash and appearing relaxed. The handlers and show hosts were calm, and the mother and her daughter showed no sign of fear. No safety barriers or protective measures were in place between the lion and the studio audience. But then something unexpected happened. The little girl let out a soft whimper, and the high-pitched sound caught the lion's attention. It stood up and stared directly at her. The handlers quickly tried to get it to settle down, and it obeyed for a moment. Then the child began to cry louder, and without warning, the The lion lunged. It grabbed the girl's legs with its front paws and bit down. The studio filled with screams as the mother stood up and tried to pull her daughter close, but the lion didn't let go. It pulled back, its grip unshaken. The handlers rushed in, one trying to pry open the lion's mouth, the other holding the animal's body. The child kept screaming as her mother clutched her tightly. The trainers, speaking rapidly in Spanish, repeated instructions like, "Stay calm and don't move," as they tried to control the situation. It took several moments before they could separate the animal from the child. One handler held the lion's head while the other pulled its body back. Eventually, they managed to get the lion to release its grip, and the girl was finally freed, crying and in shock. Her mother immediately checked her for injuries. What happened next left many viewers confused. The mother suddenly laughed. Some believed it was a reaction to the intense stress, a confused emotional response after what had just happened. Others were unsettled by how casual everyone on set seemed afterward. One of the handlers leaned in to hug both the mother and child, and the lion, still present, was even shown on camera again, while the child's cries continued in the background. The show awkwardly continued with forced laughter and uneasy smiles. Years later, when the footage was uploaded to YouTube, viewers began to notice unsettling details. Before the lion lunged, it had been staring at the child for several moments, and at one point the camera zoomed in on its face as if capturing something that was about to unfold. Though the child wasn't seriously injured, specialists warned about the long-term emotional effects of such an event. Strangely, no legal action was ever taken. The lion remained with the handlers, and the child's identity was never revealed. She was never publicly seen again. It was 1979 in Clearwater, Florida, when a new Christian-themed kids show called Joy Junction aired on the Christian television network. It featured colorful characters like Sheriff Dawn, Professor Cloudhopper, Whistler Dan, and a ventriloquist named Ron, who performed with his puppet Marty. The show focused on fun and faith, teaching kids about values, kindness, and staying away from bad influences. Ronald William Brown, the man behind the Ron character, was also active in his local Largo, Florida church community. He regularly hosted puppet shows, gave kids rides to church in the church van, and even invited them over for pizza before Bible study. To many parents, he seemed kind and trustworthy, exactly the type of person they wanted influencing their children. The show quickly became popular, with parents loving its wholesome message and kids enjoying the songs, games, and lessons. Soon, Joy Junction expanded nationally, airing on major Christian networks like Trinity Broadcasting and Family Network. It ran for nearly 20 years, from 1979 into the early 2000s, reaching thousands of homes across America. Brown used his platform to teach children about resisting temptation and staying on the right path, all while hiding something much darker behind his wholesome image. In 1998, police stopped Brown and found children's underwear in his vehicle. He claimed they were props for his puppets, and authorities let him go with no further action taken. Years passed without incident until 2012, when investigators looking into an online network involved in disturbing activities came across a man from Kansas named Michael Arnett. When they searched his computer, they found highly inappropriate images involving children, some posed in staged settings. But what really stood out were the chat logs. Arnett had been exchanging messages with a man in Florida, and that man was Ronald Brown. The two had been talking for months on a hidden forum, their conversations going beyond possession of inappropriate content to include detailed and graphic discussions involving children. Brown referenced a boy he knew personally from church, speaking of deeply troubling intentions and sharing diagrams and pictures he had secretly taken of the child. On July 19, 2012, authorities raided Brown's home in Largo. What they found was deeply alarming. Thousands of illegal files, some involving deceased children, along with written plans, drawings, and content dating back to 1978, a year before Joy Junction began. Brown was arrested and charged with possession and intent to commit serious harm against a minor. He admitted to the chats but claimed it was all fantasy and that he never planned to act on it. The court didn't believe him, and he was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison, essentially a life sentence given his age and health. In 2020, Brown died in prison at the age of 65 due to complications from a neurological illness. After his arrest, everything connected to Joy Junction went silent. Networks removed all traces of the show with no statements or press releases, and even cast members distanced themselves. For a long time, the show became lost media, with only a few clips surviving mainly from old VHS tapes uploaded to YouTube. Ronald Brown wasn't just a performer, he was trusted by parents, surrounded by children and active in the community, which makes this case so disturbing. It was 1992 in Manchester, England, when Bobby Davro, a well-known comedian and TV personality, was filming the final scene of his show, Public Enemy No. 1. Bobby was popular for his high-energy performances, and physical fitness was a big part of his life. His father, Bill Nankivell, was once an Olympic runner, and Bobby stayed active through his work. At 34, Bobby had built his career on fearless physical comedy that often pushed the boundaries of safety. His willingness to endure pain for laughs had made him a household name across Britain, with audiences tuning in specifically to watch him throw himself into increasingly elaborate stunts. The Manchester studio had become his second home over the past 3 years, and the crew had grown accustomed to Bobby's relentless perfectionism and his insistence on performing every stunt himself rather than using body doubles. Bobby's athletic background gave him confidence in physical challenges that would intimidate other performers. He had trained in gymnastics as a teenager and maintained his flexibility through daily workouts, believing that his conditioning would protect him from serious injury. His colleagues often marveled at his ability to bounce back from minor bumps and bruises that would sideline other entertainers for days. This particular filming day had proceeded smoothly, with Bobby completing several demanding sequences without complaint or hesitation. The scene they were filming was meant to be lighthearted. Bobby was locked into a wooden stocks prop, his head and hands sticking through the holes, while his fellow entertainers Keith Chegwin, Lionel Blair, and Jim Bowen threw tomatoes at him. It was supposed to be harmless fun, the kind of physical comedy that Bobby was known for. But the prop wasn't secure, and Bobby had to balance himself on a box because the floor beneath him was hard concrete. The setup seemed routine, just another day of filming comedy sketches with his colleagues. Bobby had performed countless physical stunts throughout his career without incident, and this particular scene was supposed to be one of the easier ones. The wooden stocks were meant to hold him in place while his friends pelted him with tomatoes for laughs, creating the kind of slapstick humor that audiences loved. Suddenly, Bobby lost his balance. With his arms trapped in the wooden restraints, he couldn't stop himself from falling. He hit the ground face first, and Keith Chegwin later said the sound of Bobby's head hitting the concrete was one of the worst he'd ever heard. Thankfully, Bobby managed to turn his head slightly mid-fall, which likely protected him from even worse injuries, but he still cut his chin open and briefly lost consciousness. He was rushed to the hospital, where doctors were surprised to find that he hadn't broken his nose or lost any teeth. However, he suffered a neck injury from the impact and was diagnosed with whiplash. He was told to rest, but although filming had finished, the pain in his neck continued and spread to other areas of his body. Bobby later visited an osteopath who used physical therapy to ease his symptoms. Recovery took about 6 weeks, and he eventually regained movement, but the pain never fully went away. For a while, he couldn't even do basic exercises like sit-ups, and even years later, Bobby still deals with pain in his neck and upper back. Long car rides are difficult, and sometimes he experiences arm pain and headaches caused by nerve pressure. The fall was never aired, but the BBC now uses the clip for training purposes to show how fast accidents can happen, even in a controlled setting. Bobby never received compensation for what happened, as at the time, it wasn't common to file injury claims like it is today. It was December 8, 2016, and the morning sun streamed through the windows of the KXAN News studio in Austin, Texas, as Patricia Williams prepared for another day of delivering the news to her beloved community. At 51, the veteran morning news anchor had become a fixture in Austin households for over 15 years, her warm personality and genuine care for local stories making her a trusted voice that thousands of viewers relied on to start their day. Patricia had built her career on covering community celebrations, local charity drives, and the human interest stories that connected neighbors across the sprawling Texas capital. That December morning, Patricia was excited to cover the holiday season's most heartwarming stories. The show's lineup included segments about local toy drives, holiday charity events, and year-end community celebrations that brought Austin residents together. Her co-anchors and production crew had worked with her for years, creating a family-like atmosphere in the newsroom where Patricia's infectious laughter and mentoring spirit made everyone feel valued and appreciated. But for several weeks, Patricia had been struggling with severe headaches that seemed to worsen with each passing day. The pain would strike suddenly during editorial meetings, forcing her to excuse herself to find a quiet place to recover. She attributed the symptoms to work stress and the demanding schedule of morning television, which required her to wake at 3:30 a.m. and maintain high energy levels throughout the broadcast. Patricia had always been dedicated to her craft, often working through minor illnesses and personal challenges to ensure her viewers received reliable news coverage. Her colleagues noticed she seemed more tired than usual, occasionally pausing mid-sentence during rehearsals or appearing momentarily confused when reviewing teleprompter scripts. Patricia dismissed their concerns with her characteristic smile, insisting she just needed more sleep and perhaps a vacation after the holiday season. The production team had no idea that their beloved anchor was experiencing the early warning signs of a catastrophic medical emergency that would unfold in front of thousands of viewers. During a live interview segment about local holiday charities, Patricia was speaking with a representative from the Austin Food Bank about their Christmas meal distribution program. The conversation was flowing naturally as Patricia asked thoughtful questions about volunteer opportunities and donation needs. Then, without warning, she suddenly stopped speaking mid-sentence, her words trailing off as she stared blankly at the camera with a confused expression that immediately alarmed her co-anchor. Patricia appeared disoriented and lost, her usual professional composure replaced by obvious distress as she struggled to understand what was happening to her. She began speaking incoherently, her words slurred and disconnected as her co-anchor tried desperately to continue the interview and maintain some semblance of normalcy. The camera operators and production crew watched in horror as Patricia's condition rapidly deteriorated before their eyes. Then Patricia collapsed at the news desk during the live broadcast, her body going limp as she fell forward onto the papers and coffee mug that had been part of her morning routine for 15 years. Viewers across Austin watched in shock as paramedics arrived on set and began emergency treatment, their professional urgency contrasting sharply with the cheerful holiday decorations that still adorned the studio. The station eventually cut to commercial, but thousands had already witnessed the medical emergency unfold in real time. Patricia was rushed to the hospital where she was diagnosed with a massive stroke that had caused irreversible brain damage. Despite the medical team's best efforts, she died 3 days later, surrounded by family members who had flown in from across the country. The morning show went off the air for a week as the team grieved and processed the traumatic loss of their colleague and friend. Viewers flooded social media with tributes, sharing how Patricia had been part of their daily routines for years, her presence providing comfort and connection in an increasingly disconnected world. A journalism scholarship was established in her name at the University of Texas to support aspiring broadcast journalists who shared her passion for community storytelling. It was May 23, 2016, when 34-year-old Cameron Blake positioned his mobile broadcasting unit along a desolate stretch of highway outside Moore, Oklahoma. Cameron worked as a meteorologist for a regional news station, known for his fearless storm coverage and ability to make complex weather patterns understandable to viewers. His childhood experience surviving a tornado drove his obsession with understanding these violent storms. Beside him sat 28-year-old Peter Webb, his camera operator, who had voiced concerns about their proximity to the developing supercell. Peter was cautious by nature, but he trusted Cameron's experience and deferred to his judgment, even as the radar showed the storm intensifying at an alarming rate. The afternoon sky had turned an ominous shade of green-gray. Cameron had positioned their modified SUV facing east to capture the storm's approach, explaining the rotation patterns to viewers watching at home. Among those viewers was his wife Jennifer, 7 months pregnant with their first child. The tornado touched down approximately 1 mile southwest of their position, appearing as a dark wedge-shaped column. Cameron's voice remained steady as he narrated the touchdown for nearly 15 seconds, his professional instinct overriding everything else. The funnel moved northeast at 35 miles per hour, closing the distance rapidly. Debris began pelting the vehicle, branches, gravel, and roofing material creating violent hammering sounds. Peter shouted that they needed to leave immediately, but Cameron continued broadcasting. The tornado's outer circulation reached them, and the SUV began rocking violently as gusts likely pushed 120 to 130 miles per hour near the vehicle. Hail and small debris hammered the glass. A broken 2x4 stud, roughly 4 feet long, punched through the driver's side window at an estimated 100 to 120 miles per hour. The tempered glass exploded into pellets. The board fragmented on the window frame, and the leading segment struck Cameron's left temple, causing a depressed skull fracture with bone driven into the brain. A second shard of aluminum siding scissored through the windshield and tore across his right clavicle, likely lacerating the subclavian artery. Bright arterial bleeding pooled across the seat within seconds. Peter managed to accelerate away from the tornado's path, screaming Cameron's name. The mounted camera, streaked with blood and debris, continued recording, its distorted footage catching only fragments of what happened inside the vehicle. Cameron's breathing became irregular and gasping, indicating severe brain trauma and imminent death. Peter drove for approximately 2 minutes before pulling over, pressing his jacket against Cameron's shoulder wound. But the damage was catastrophic. Blood had soaked through Cameron's clothing and pooled on the floor. His face had turned pale gray, his lips blue. The irregular gasping breaths came further apart, then stopped entirely. Peter felt for a pulse but found nothing. The live feed continued transmitting until the station finally cut to the studio. The tornado had deposited debris across the main highway, blocking emergency routes. Responders reached the location nearly 20 minutes later and pronounced Cameron dead at the scene from massive head trauma and blood loss. The station faced immediate backlash for not cutting the feed sooner. Peter resigned 3 weeks later. 11 weeks after his death, Jennifer delivered their daughter, Sophia, at full term and filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the station. It was November 8, 2017, when 41-year-old Lydia Grant arrived at a local television studio in Toronto for what should have been a routine cooking segment. Lydia was a culinary instructor who had been teaching French cuisine for years and making occasional appearances on a small regional lifestyle program that aired weekday mornings to a modest local audience. She had never experienced a serious incident on set before. She was known for her warm personality and expertise in classic techniques requiring open flame preparation. That morning, she wore a flowing silk blend blouse in burgundy paired with her chef's apron and her signature pearl necklace, a gift from her late mother. The segment focused on preparing crêpes Suzette, a classic French dessert requiring tableside flambé with Grand Marnier liqueur. Producers had debated cutting the flambé portion due to safety concerns, but Lydia insisted it was her signature. The live segment began with Lydia preparing orange butter sauce in a copper pan. She added approximately 4 ounces of Grand Marnier to the hot pan and tilted it toward the gas flame to ignite the alcohol vapors. The alcohol ignited as expected, thin blue flames flickering across the sauce. Lydia reached for a serving plate while holding the flaming pan, turning slightly away from the camera. Her silk blend blouse sleeve, which had come unbuttoned at the cuff, draped forward and made contact with the flames. It ignited instantly, flames racing up her right sleeve from wrist to shoulder in approximately 2 seconds as the fabric fused and burned against her skin. Lydia gasped and dropped the copper pan, which spilled flaming liquid across the kitchen island. She instinctively began batting at the flames with her left hand, which caused the fire to spread to her left sleeve as well. Derek rushed toward her with a kitchen towel but hesitated, unsure how to help. Flames reached Lydia's hair, which had been styled with aerosol hairspray 90 minutes earlier. Her hair ignited in a sudden flash, flames spreading across her scalp and down to her face and neck. Her initial screams turned to choking, gasping sounds as the heat seared her airways and burned her facial skin. She stumbled backward and fell sideways onto the studio floor. Derek threw the towel over her upper body, but the towel itself caught fire from the intensity of the burning synthetic fabric. James grabbed a fire extinguisher but fumbled with the safety pin. By the time he deployed the extinguisher, Lydia had sustained 2nd and 3rd degree burns across approximately 38% of her body, including her face, scalp, neck, both arms, and upper chest. Lydia remained conscious, making hoarse sounds as she struggled to breathe. The burned skin on her face had begun sloughing off, and her airways were rapidly swelling from thermal injury. Paramedics arrived and recognized the severity of her airway burns. Her breathing had become labored and wheezing. They performed an emergency intubation in the studio to secure her airway before transport. While beginning fluid resuscitation, she was transported to the regional burn center in critical condition with dropping blood pressure and signs of shock. Lydia Grant died that afternoon from complications of severe burn injuries, including respiratory failure and cardiac arrest. The network immediately suspended all cooking segments involving open flame. Derek required psychological counseling and took a 3-month leave. Though the station never released the footage, a short off-screen recording briefly circulated in local culinary circles online before being removed. It was September 22, 2019, when 47-year-old Dominic Hayes arrived at the Riverside Tower construction site in Portland, Oregon, to conduct a safety inspection for the city's building department. Dominic was a Canadian structural inspector contracted under an international peer review compliance agreement, with years of experience evaluating high-rise projects across North America. Known for his meticulous attention to detail, he was specifically requested to assess the tower's steel framework before the next phase of construction could proceed. The Riverside Tower was a 40-story mixed-use building that had reached the 28th floor when concerns arose about welding quality in the steel beam connections. Dominic had reviewed contractor reports showing some irregularities, but had been told by the construction foreman that all critical joints had been re-inspected and certified safe for his walkthrough. His colleague Sarah had questioned the timing of the inspection, but Dominic trusted the contractor's assurances. The inspection team included project manager Lisa Rodriguez, safety coordinator Jake Morrison, and a building department photographer. The assessment required Dominic to examine beam connections on the 28th floor while documenting any visible defects in the steel framework. The inspection began with Dominic positioned near the building's northeast corner, explaining proper welding techniques while moving systematically along the exposed steel beams. A sudden metallic shift rang through the steel frame. Not a clean ping, but the deep scraping sound of a connection slipping under load. At the time, the inspection team assumed it was just thermal movement in the beams, a common sound on unfinished floors, and no one recognized it as the onset of structural failure. Investigators later determined that the noise originated from a critical load-bearing joint, where substandard welding had left a hidden flaw. Once the connection slipped, the compromised weld fractured instantly under stress. Within moments, the failure spread to adjacent connections, causing a localized collapse limited to the northeast corner between the 28th and 26th floors. The drop halted when the load was redistributed across lateral bracing and intact crossbeams, preventing full progressive collapse of the tower. The floor began sagging toward the center. Dominic lost his footing as the steel decking buckled beneath him. A primary support beam twisted and separated from its connection, and the entire northeast section of the 28th floor gave way. The floor section dropped in a pancaking motion with Dominic falling through the failing structure. He dropped approximately 15 feet through twisted steel and debris before his body struck a horizontal I-beam at roughly 20 miles per hour. The impact broke his right arm, several ribs, and caused internal bleeding, but he remained alert and tried to grab onto the beam as the collapse continued. The partial floor failure extended downward through 2 additional levels before stabilizing, sending debris and structural members cascading through the open framework. As his body fell through the dust and twisted steel, the site's documentation drone, hovering in a fixed survey position, only caught a brief, obscured glimpse of movement before losing visual in the debris cloud. Dominic's body struck a concrete foundation wall at ground level at an estimated 45 miles per hour. His descent had been partially slowed by secondary impacts and structural interference during the collapse, preventing a full free-fall acceleration. The impact dislocated his shoulder and fractured his collarbone, while his torso compressed against the wall, causing severe internal injuries, including a punctured lung and damaged spleen. He sustained catastrophic internal injuries and was likely killed on impact. The collapsed floor section crashed down seconds afterward, burying much of the area in twisted steel and concrete debris. The drone, still hovering in its fixed survey position, passively recorded the aftermath. In the wide-angle feed, Dominic's body could be seen partially visible among the wreckage. Emergency responders needed over an hour to safely navigate the unstable debris field. Dominic Hayes was pronounced dead at the scene, along with 3 construction workers. It was November 23, 2017, when 29-year-old Phoebe Larson arrived at the staging area for Philadelphia's annual Thanksgiving parade. Phoebe worked full-time as an event coordinator, but volunteered her expertise to the parade committee each year as a passion project. Known for her infectious enthusiasm and organizational skills, she had participated in the parade for 6 consecutive years and had been promoted to lead handler for one of the parade's largest character balloons. The balloon was a 52-foot-tall cartoon character, requiring a team of 24 handlers using guide ropes to control its movement. Weather conditions that morning included sustained winds of 22 miles per hour, with gusts up to 34 miles per hour, approaching the parade's safety threshold. Parade officials had debated canceling the balloon portion, but decided to proceed with enhanced safety protocols. Phoebe had attended an early morning safety briefing, where handlers were instructed to immediately release ropes if wind conditions became dangerous. Her position was as lead handler on the front left guide rope, responsible for coordinating the team's movements. Her parents, visiting from Minnesota, were watching from the bleachers approximately 1 mile into the parade route. As Phoebe's balloon team approached the intersection of Market Street and 16th Street, wind speed suddenly increased. The balloon, which had been floating at a stable 15-foot altitude, suddenly lifted to nearly 30 feet as a gust caught its broad surface area. Phoebe immediately radioed parade control to report the dangerous conditions. A second, stronger gust estimated at 43 miles per hour struck the balloon from the west, causing it to tilt dramatically eastward and rise another 20 feet. The sudden upward force lifted 3 handlers on the eastern side completely off their feet. Phoebe shouted to her team to hold steady while the balloon continued rising. The balloon reached approximately 65 feet in altitude, and the guide ropes were at maximum tension. The front left rope that Phoebe was gripping suddenly snapped at a connection point near the balloon. The severed rope, still under extreme tension, recoiled violently downward and backward, the frayed end traveling at approximately 70 miles per hour. The rope struck Phoebe across her face and neck, the impact fracturing her jaw, shattering her left cheekbone, and crushing her larynx. She was thrown backward approximately 6 feet by the force of the impact, landing on her back on the asphalt parade route, with her head striking the ground. The impact with the ground caused a basilar skull fracture and immediate loss of consciousness. Blood began flowing from her nose, mouth, and left ear, classic signs of severe head trauma, while her body exhibited rigid posturing with arms and legs extended. Parade officials immediately halted the procession, and emergency medical personnel rushed to Phoebe's location. She was found unresponsive with irregular breathing and a weak pulse. Her pupils were unequal, the left dilated and non-reactive, the right constricted, indicating severe brain injury and increased intracranial pressure. Paramedics established an airway and began ventilation while preparing for immediate transport to the nearest trauma center. Her parents, who had witnessed the accident from the bleachers, were restrained by security as they attempted to reach her. Phoebe was transported to the trauma center, where emergency scans revealed massive intracranial hemorrhaging and severe brain swelling. Phoebe Larson was pronounced dead that afternoon after neurological testing confirmed complete cessation of brain activity. The parade was immediately canceled, and all balloon portions of future parades were suspended. Investigation revealed that the rope had been in service for 7 years, 2 years beyond its recommended replacement schedule. Her parents filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the parade organizers. The incident prompted multiple cities to revise their parade balloon safety guidelines, updating wind limits and equipment replacement schedules. It was February 16, 2015, when 38-year-old Grant Nichols arrived at the demolition site in Dallas, Texas, for what should have been the culmination of 6 weeks of meticulous planning. Grant was a demolition engineer and explosives expert who had overseen 67 successful building demolitions during his 14-year career. He specialized in urban demolitions requiring precise explosive placement to ensure structures collapsed inward without damaging surrounding buildings. Known for his methodical approach, Grant had earned a reputation as one of the most reliable demolition specialists in the Southwest. The project involved demolishing an 11-story office building that had been vacant for 3 years. Grant had spent 6 weeks planning the demolition, placing 847 individual explosive charges at strategic points throughout the building's support structure. The demolition was scheduled for Sunday morning to minimize traffic and ensure maximum safety. A 500-meter safety perimeter had been established, with police blocking roads and evacuating nearby buildings. Local news stations had been invited to broadcast the demolition live. Grant's observation position was in a reinforced command trailer located 550 meters south of the building. His wife, Rebecca, and their 8-year-old son, Tyle, were watching the broadcast from home. Grant performed his final safety check and initiated the firing sequence. The first series of explosions detonated on the building's ground floor as planned. The building's south side began collapsing inward as dust clouds billowed outward. An anomaly occurred. The building's north side failed to collapse as programmed, remaining partially standing while the south side fell. This created an unbalanced load that caused the remaining north structure to tilt southward rather than collapsing straight down. Grant immediately recognized the failure and shouted for everyone to move back. The tilting north section, approximately 6 stories of concrete and steel, weighing an estimated 2,400 tons, began falling southward like a toppling tree. The structure fell outside the planned collapse zone, aimed directly toward the safety perimeter, where emergency vehicles were positioned. Grant, realizing the danger to personnel, made the decision to leave the command trailer and run toward the perimeter to warn people. He exited the trailer and began sprinting north, waving his arms. The collapsing north section struck the ground approximately 480 meters from the original building footprint. The impact sent a pressure wave through the debris field, hurling concrete fragments and steel sections outward. A 12-foot length of number 11 rebar, weighing roughly 60 pounds, was launched by the force and struck Grant from behind while he was still running toward the perimeter. The bar hit across his upper back and neck at an estimated 30 miles per hour, severing his spinal cord at the C3 vertebra and fracturing his skull. Although the injury caused instantaneous loss of motor control, the remaining forward momentum carried his body several feet. Grant was thrown forward roughly 10 feet, his body tumbling across the ground before coming to rest face down. Television cameras had inadvertently captured Grant's final moments. Emergency personnel reached Grant, finding him unresponsive with no pulse. His neck was visibly deformed, and blood was flowing from his nose and ears. Paramedics began CPR, despite the obvious severity of his injuries. Grant Nichols was pronounced dead at the scene from a traumatic spinal cord transection and severe head trauma. The inquiry uncovered that a trio of demolition charges malfunctioned because of defective electrical connections, resulting in an uneven structural failure. The contracting firm faced legal liability proceedings and contract termination, which ultimately led to its insolvency. The incident led to updated demolition protocols, including mandatory secondary detonation verification checks before final firing sequences. It was July 9, 2016, when 33-year-old Jetta Howard arrived at the base camp in Chamonix, French Alps, for what should have been a routine mountain rescue operation. Jetta was a Norwegian mountain rescue specialist and paramedic who had been working in alpine rescue operations for 9 years. Known for her technical climbing skills and calm demeanor during high-stress operations, she had successfully participated in over 200 mountain rescues. The rescue operation involved extracting an injured climber from a steep rock face at approximately 11,150 feet elevation on Mont Blanc. A documentary crew had been filming a series about mountain rescue operations and had been granted live relay access for a regional alpine emergency broadcast, with helicopter footage transmitted in real time to local television affiliates. The injured climber, a German tourist, had fallen approximately 30 feet and sustained a compound leg fracture requiring immediate helicopter extraction. Weather conditions were marginal for helicopter operations, with gusty winds averaging 25 miles per hour and occasional stronger gusts. Jette had been selected as the rescue specialist to be lowered from the helicopter due to her experience with technical extractions. The helicopter pilot was a French aviator with 22 years of alpine flying experience. The helicopter departed with Jette secured in a rescue harness connected to a 100-foot steel cable winch system. The helicopter reached the injured climber's position and began hovering approximately 80 feet above the rock face. Jette was lowered from the helicopter while carrying medical equipment and a rescue litter. She reached the injured climber and began assessing his injuries while communicating with the helicopter crew via radio. While Jette was securing the climber into the rescue litter, a sudden wind gust estimated at 40 miles per hour struck the helicopter from the west. The helicopter was pushed approximately 50 feet eastward, causing the cable to swing dramatically. A second, stronger gust struck the helicopter, causing it to drop approximately 30 feet suddenly. The sudden descent created slack in the cable, which then snapped taut again, creating a violent whipping motion. Jette was caught off balance and lost her grip on the rock face. The helicopter was struck by a third gust, an updraft that lifted the aircraft suddenly upward approximately 40 feet. The rapid ascent put extreme tension on the cable system, which was rated for 2,000 pounds but was now supporting dynamic loading. The cable attachment point on Jette's harness, a carabiner that had been in service for 4 years, failed under the stress. Investigators later determined that the violent swing had side-loaded the gate, twisting it out of alignment. The carabiner gate broke open under the load, and Jette separated from the cable, beginning an immediate free fall from approximately 95 feet above the rock face. Her body fell for approximately 2.1 seconds, rotating backward as she dropped. She struck a sloping rock face at approximately 52 miles per hour, impacting primarily on her back and left side. The initial impact fractured her spine at T7 and T8 vertebrae, shattered her left shoulder blade, and broke 4 ribs. Her body bounced off the sloping rock and continued falling, tumbling through the air for another 40 feet before striking a second, more vertical rock face. The second impact occurred head first, crushing her helmet and fracturing her skull in multiple places, with bone fragments driven into her brain tissue. She bounced again and fell another 60 feet, her body now limp, before striking a narrow ledge. The final impact broke both legs, her pelvis, and her right arm. She came to rest approximately 195 feet below her initial position. The entire fall was captured by both the helicopter-mounted camera and a fixed base camp relay feed. The footage was still transmitting live when the fall occurred, giving viewers only a few seconds of the incident before the broadcast was abruptly cut from the control room. The injured climber witnessed the fall directly from his position in the rescue litter. A second rescue team reached Jette's position, finding her unresponsive with massive trauma. Jette Howard was pronounced dead at the scene from multiple traumatic injuries incompatible with life. Investigation revealed the carabiner failure was due to metal fatigue from repeated loading cycles, leading to new equipment replacement protocols. The injured climber survived but required extensive psychological treatment. It was February 18, 2016, in Wichita, Kansas. Inside a small local TV studio, morning anchor Laura Kinney started her usual early shift. The set lights were bright, the crew small, and everything followed its normal routine. Laura had worked in radio before joining television 5 years earlier. Viewers liked her for being steady and clear, especially during local emergencies or storm reports. That morning, she arrived earlier than usual, sipping coffee and rubbing her neck. She mentioned it felt stiff, joking that she must have slept wrong. A few co-workers noticed her voice sounded slightly off, but they thought she was just tired. The broadcast began at 6 a.m. sharp. Laura sat beside her co-anchor, ready for the local weather segment. Everything looked normal to viewers. The calm tone, the light banter, the switch between graphics. In the control room, producers kept the teleprompter rolling as the floor crew adjusted the camera angles. It was just another weekday show, with segments about community events and mild winter temperatures. Halfway through a sentence, something changed. Laura's left hand slipped off the desk, knocking cue cards onto the floor. For a moment, she stayed frozen, eyes still open but unfocused. Her smile faltered, and her voice cut off mid-word. On screen, it looked like she paused to listen to someone in her earpiece. Her co-anchor turned to her, unsure whether it was a planned pause or a mistake. Then Laura's head tilted to one side, and she slumped slightly forward in her chair. The control room reacted fast. A director called to switch cameras, cutting to a weather graphic to cover the feed. The co-anchor leaned toward her, whispering something the microphones didn't catch. Someone off-camera shouted her name. The station had a short broadcast delay of a few seconds, just enough to stop most of what happened from airing on TV. But the live stream running on the network's website didn't cut fast enough. Viewers online saw about 10 seconds of confusion. Laura collapsing, papers sliding, crew members stepping into frame before the screen switched to an ad break. Inside the studio, floor staff rushed forward. One producer hit the master mute button as the commercial loop started playing. When the cameras were cut, the floor manager dimmed the lights to reduce glare while the crew gathered around her desk. A staff member moved her chair back, while another called out for the set to be cleared. No one outside the studio knew what was happening yet. Regular viewers simply assumed it was a technical fault. Within an hour, the station's programming went silent. The screen showed a plain blue background with a notice about technical issues. Social media users began asking what had gone wrong when the live stream froze mid-report. Short clips from the feed briefly appeared online before being removed by moderators. Those who saw it described the moment as sudden and unsettling, with only the low hum of background studio noise. By midday, all live segments were canceled, and staff were advised not to comment publicly. Viewers who called the station reached a recorded message explaining that the morning broadcast had been interrupted due to an on-air emergency. For 2 days, the newsroom stayed quiet. Regular programming resumed the following Monday with a different anchor at the desk and a brief note thanking viewers for their understanding. The studio lights came back on, the music cues played, and the set looked exactly the same. For the staff who had been there that morning, the room stayed unusually quiet for the rest of the week. It was September 14th, 2018, in Legazpi City, Albay. A typhoon had made landfall before noon, bringing winds strong enough to shake street signs and bend power lines. Rain came in sheets, hitting the pavement sideways. Local news crews had been deployed across the region to report live updates. Among the crews sent out that morning was 34-year-old Miguel de la Peña, a relatively new field correspondent assigned to cover weather updates outside the main city. He had joined the network less than 2 years earlier, after working behind the scenes as a production assistant. Storm coverage wasn't new to him, but this was one of the few times he was leading a live field report. Producers described him as steady on camera and willing to take difficult assignments, even in poor weather. That morning, he and his cameraman set up near a closed pier along the coast. The sky was a flat gray, visibility down to less than a few hundred feet. Seawater sprayed over the concrete barriers as waves struck the shore. Miguel wore a blue rain jacket, hood tightened, microphone wrapped in plastic. Behind him, a few residents stood under awnings, watching from a safe distance. He spoke steadily, updating wind speed readings and evacuation numbers, while the cameraman kept the lens steady despite the gusts. Their early segments aired without issue. Each one lasted less than a minute before switching back to the studio anchor. Between takes, Miguel and the cameraman took cover behind a parked van to shield their equipment from the wind. They checked their earpieces for sound clarity, and Miguel ended each report with a short reminder for viewers to remain indoors. By late morning, the wind picked up again. The next segment was meant to show how conditions had worsened along the pier. Miguel stood several feet in front of the camera, the storm roaring behind him. Pieces of trash, small branches, and plastic containers blew across the ground. He began describing the intensity of the wind when something shifted in the background. A warehouse roof panel near the shore started to lift. The sheet of corrugated metal, about 10 feet long, came loose from its bolts and turned end over end in the air. On the live feed, viewers saw Miguel glance upward mid-sentence. His words stopped, replaced by the howl of wind against the microphone. The camera tilted slightly as the cameraman reacted, trying to follow his movement. In the corner of the frame, a gray blur streaked across. The feed shook violently for half a second before cutting to static. People watching at home thought it was just another connection drop, common during storms. But those taking shelter near the pier saw it happen. A market vendor crouching beside a delivery truck later said the noise began with a deep rumble, followed by the heavy crash of metal striking concrete. The cameraman was knocked down by wind but managed to crawl behind the van, shielding the camera under his body. The network's broadcast continued from the studio. Unaware of what had happened at the pier, producers tried to reach the field team for several minutes before switching to pre-recorded updates from other regions. By early afternoon, all outdoor coverage was replaced with studio segments. A short announcement noted connection problems affecting reporters near the coast. Later that day, local authorities blocked access to the pier to remove loose metal sheets and scattered debris. The network later issued a short notice online, pausing live field reporting until conditions improved. It was October 3, 2015, in Manchester, England. A local charity event brought together small-time performers, singers, and illusionists for a weekend recording inside a modest studio. One of the acts scheduled that afternoon was Ryan Mallory, 29, a street magician who had started appearing on minor regional programs. He was known for small escape demonstrations at fairs and public gatherings. The segment he planned to film was called Escape from the Tank, a timed underwater act meant to close the second half of the show. The tank stood at the center of the stage, made of clear acrylic panels and about 6 feet tall. Metal brackets held it in place under bright studio lights. The plan was simple. Ryan would be handcuffed, submerged, and then escape within 60 seconds while the studio audience watched the timer on a digital clock. Although the show was promoted as a live special, most of the performances were pre-recorded earlier in the day and edited for smoother transitions. For safety, rehearsals had used lightweight training locks and a quick-release chain. Before filming began, one crew member questioned whether the heavier stainless steel cuffs were necessary, but the decision was made to use them for visual impact. Crew members later recalled that Ryan seemed focused but restless, pacing near the tank while the host delivered his introduction. The production team filled the tank using a side hose, checking that the water reached just below the top rim. As assistants helped secure the cuffs around his wrists and ankles, the audience counted down from 5. Ryan climbed a small ladder and lowered himself into the water, holding a small key between his teeth, a familiar part of his routine. The lid was locked in place, and the clock started. At first, everything looked normal. The crowd could see his arms moving under the surface, the cuffs glinting under the lights. He twisted, shifting his shoulders, as he had done in past performances. Around the 30-second mark, his movements grew slower. The key slipped from his mouth and sank to the bottom of the tank. For a few seconds, no one reacted. It looked like a planned twist. Some audience members even laughed softly, expecting a quick recovery. Behind the curtain, 2 stagehands noticed the change in the water. Bubbles were rising in short, uneven bursts. One of them signaled to the stage manager that something was off. At 40 seconds, Ryan's motions became jerky, and he pressed one hand against the glass. The stage manager shouted for crew members assigned to handle safety to step in. None of them had dealt with a full water submersion act before. One assistant ran to pull the emergency release lever. The mechanism meant to lift the lid and drain the tank, but it jammed halfway. The camera feed captured the confusion. Crew members stepped into view as others tried to pry open the top with metal bars. Audience members began to stand, unsure if it was still part of the act. The sound in the room shifted from clapping to a mix of shouts and scraping metal. When the lid finally gave way, water spilled across the stage floor. Ryan was pulled out by 2 assistants and laid on a flat surface beside the tank. For several seconds, the stage stayed quiet, except for someone calling for an ambulance. One assistant started basic CPR while others cleared space around the tank. During editing, producers cut the escape sequence and inserted a short placeholder card marked "Technical Delay." The program then continued with the next recorded act, leaving the studio audience and viewers unaware of what had taken place. Producers later chose to leave the segment out of the final program. The edited version of the charity special aired without any mention of the escape act. A few months afterward, a short rehearsal clip recorded during equipment testing surfaced in a small online forum for local performers. It showed Ryan practicing with the lighter cuffs and surfacing normally. It became the only version of the stunt seen outside the studio. It was November 9, 2015, in Lyon, France. A regional civic hall had been converted into a small debate venue for a community television segment that would be recorded and broadcast later in the week. About 50 residents sat in folding chairs facing a low platform where 5 speakers discussed local housing policy. Cameras stood on tripods near the back, their red lights steady as the discussion began. The event was routine, part of a series of taped town hall discussions the city used for public outreach. One of the panelists was 61-year-old Jean-Marc Delcourt, a long-serving city council member known for his careful attention to budgets. The taping had started just after lunch, and the panel had already gone through several topics. The room was warm from the lights, and several speakers dabbed their faces with tissues between questions. Jean-Marc spoke clearly, gesturing often, pausing occasionally to check his notes. Technicians in the back monitored the sound levels while the host tried to keep the discussion within its time limits. About 20 minutes into the recording, tension increased as the speakers began to argue over rent control measures. Jean-Marc leaned forward to answer a pointed question from another guest. Mid-sentence, his voice caught. He straightened slightly, one hand braced on the table. For a few seconds, no one reacted. The other guests kept talking over him. Then his pen dropped to the floor. He pushed his chair back and tried to stand, but his movement faltered. The moderator stopped speaking and turned toward him, asking if he was all right. Jean-Marc's right arm dropped, and he slumped sideways. Chairs scraped against the floor as the nearest panelist reached out to steady him. A murmur passed through the audience. One of the camera operators called for the lights to be dimmed while crew members stepped forward. A staff medic and a volunteer from the municipal team rushed to the stage and lowered him gently to the ground. They began chest compressions, while another person used a handheld radio to call for emergency services. The cameras kept running for several seconds before someone shouted to cut power to the recorders. The host stood off to the side, holding a clipboard, as technicians guided the audience out through a side exit. Paramedics arrived within minutes and took over from the crew. The rest of the panel waited outside the hall, uncertain whether the taping would resume. The footage from the debate was never used. Editors replaced the planned segment with a short civic update and took the event listing off the local channel's schedule. A short notice posted later that week mentioned that filming had been stopped due to a medical emergency. The community program resumed the next month with a different panel and no reference to the incident. It was December 14, 2013, in São Paulo, Brazil. A small production team had been hired to record a Christmas-themed segment for a local children's program inside a shopping mall. The goal was to film short clips for the mall's holiday campaign, children meeting Santa, naming their wished-for gifts, and ending each take with a burst of confetti. The setup was simple: a red chair in the center, boxes wrapped in gold paper around it, and a low wooden platform hiding the small confetti rigs. 27-year-old João Ribeiro worked as a stage assistant. For this event, he wore the Santa costume and handled the prop triggers beneath the chair. The production crew had built the rig earlier that morning. It used small air pressure canisters to release paper confetti upward in short bursts. One technician had adjusted a canister after moisture caused a minor clog, but hadn't repeated the full pressure test because the next group of children was already waiting. By mid-afternoon, the filming had run smoothly through several rounds. Parents stood near the ropes taking photos while production staff guided children one by one to the chair. João pressed the release button after each take, letting the confetti fall while assistants swept up between groups. The final segment of the day was meant to feature a larger burst timed to music from a speaker behind the backdrop. As the next group approached, João reset the mechanism and signaled that he was ready. The director counted down. The children began their lines, reading from cue cards, while mall shoppers paused nearby to watch. When João pressed the control for the confetti, the sound was wrong, more of a heavy pop than the usual short hiss. A moment later, the platform beneath the chair jolted upward. The pressure canister had ruptured instead of releasing air through the valve. The blast knocked João backward into the stack of gift boxes. The lights flickered as smoke and fragments of shredded paper filled the air. Children closest to the set were pulled aside by parents, and staff shouted for everyone to move back. One technician hit the power switch for the stage lights, while another grabbed a fire extinguisher, unsure of what had failed. The mall's security team arrived within minutes and closed off the area with temporary barriers. Filming stopped immediately. Emergency responders later confirmed that João sustained fatal injuries from the blast and was pronounced dead at the scene. The remaining equipment was disconnected and covered with tarps while authorities inspected the rig. No further announcements were made inside the mall. Shoppers only saw workers removing parts of the stage. That evening, the holiday display was replaced with a plain backdrop and a sign informing visitors that maintenance work was in progress on the seasonal installation. The production company quietly canceled the rest of the scheduled recordings. In the following weeks, the mall continued its Christmas program without stage props, using recorded music and a standard photo area instead. No footage from the earlier sessions was released, and the segment was never mentioned again in the show's schedule. It was December 22, 2013, in Yokohama, Japan. The plaza outside a large shopping mall had been turned into a parade route for the annual winter celebration. Every December, local businesses sponsored a short procession featuring holiday music, dancers, and themed floats meant to draw weekend crowds. The atmosphere was light, with parents holding phones above their heads and children clutching paper flags. A small community TV crew had been invited to film the event for a weekend program about local holiday activities. Their setup included 2 cameras on tripods and a handheld camcorder for close-up shots along the route. One of the performers that afternoon was Kenji Morita, 26, a part-time entertainer hired through an event staffing agency. He had been assigned to wear a reindeer mascot suit and ride the lead float, a small truck platform decorated with imitation snow and metallic ribbons. Kenji had done similar work before at mall promotions and school festivals. His role was to wave, toss soft snowballs to the crowd, and keep the energy light for the camera crew recording nearby. The morning had been busy. Setup crews ran cables for speakers, attached lights, and checked the floats. The truck Kenji stood on had a narrow front section lined with a light aluminum railing covered in tinsel. It wasn't meant for weight-bearing, only decoration. One staff member had noticed that part of the front frame felt loose, but decided it was minor and tied it down with wire instead of rebolting it. The parade started slightly behind schedule after a sound test delayed the first lineup. By early afternoon, the plaza was full. Security volunteers guided the crowd to stay behind rope barriers, while children waved at passing performers. Kenji climbed onto his float, adjusting his heavy mascot head before taking position near the front corner. The costume restricted his vision, and the padded boots made footing unstable. When the signal to start came, the truck moved slowly along the marked path. The community TV crew followed along one side, capturing wide shots and cutaways for later editing. As the float turned near the central fountain, the driver steered gently, but hit a shallow incline that caused the platform to jolt slightly. Kenji, trying to steady himself, reached for the railing. The wire ties snapped from the tension, and the panel shifted forward. His right foot tangled in one of the speaker cables taped along the floor. He stumbled, unable to regain balance, and fell backward from the float onto the pavement behind the moving truck. The nearest camera operator caught the moment. The image wobbled as the lens followed the float, capturing Kenji's fall for less than a second before the operator realized something was wrong and turned away. For a few moments, the parade continued. Some spectators clapped, thinking the stumble was part of the performance, until one of the other mascots shouted toward the driver. The truck came to a stop, and the speakers kept playing the holiday music until a technician cut the sound. Security staff and parade volunteers moved quickly, forming a line to block the view while bystanders stepped back. A few people continued to film, unaware of the seriousness of the situation. Emergency responders arrived from a nearby fire station within minutes. Paramedics began first aid as the crowd was guided toward alternate exits. The remaining floats were directed to a holding area behind the mall, and the event was quietly suspended for the day. Despite immediate treatment, he was pronounced dead shortly after arriving at a nearby hospital. Afterward, the community TV team turned over their footage to mall management and removed the segment from their production schedule. Editors later reviewed the material and confirmed that only a few seconds showed the incident before the camera moved. The clip was stored in the archive, but never aired. The following week, the mall reopened the plaza with the decorations scaled back. The float route was shortened, and future parades were restricted to walking performers. A short local notice mentioned that the previous weekend's festivities had been paused because of an equipment-related accident. No further details were released. The community program aired a short holiday feature as planned, omitting any mention of the parade. It became an event remembered quietly, one that had once been cheerful but was not discussed again. It was April 12, 2016 in Cleveland, Ohio. The noon broadcast at a small local station began like any other weekday. The studio lights bright, the air conditioned, and the newsroom running on its usual tense rhythm. No one imagined that a routine food segment would end in a tragedy that unfolded in seconds. Melissa Harding, 39, had worked at the station for 6 years as a midday anchor. She had built her career on projecting authority, but inside the newsroom she was known more for her sharp tone and constant demands than for teamwork. She frequently berated interns and producers over minor issues, often treating her position as a platform for control rather than collaboration. Colleagues recalled her habit of eating during breaks, sometimes even mid-broadcast, and how she scolded staff if snacks were missing from her desk. Her polished on-air presence contrasted with her impatience off-camera, a contradiction that sometimes pushed her into careless behavior. The environment of a live broadcast demands discipline. Anchors must transition seamlessly between stories, follow precise timing, and maintain clear diction under pressure. Any distraction, whether equipment failure, misplaced notes, or food consumption, can disrupt the rhythm of a program. Producers routinely reminded Harding of the risks of eating while cued, particularly during lighter segments. Like many anchors, she assumed her routines were safe. And in a setting where dozens of decisions happened every minute, one overlooked caution could shift events dramatically. That day's lineup featured a short segment promoting a local deli. Harding was irritated about the rushed preparation and snapped at an assistant who brought out a sample plate she deemed poorly presented. Off camera, she ate several bites while waiting for her cue, ignoring reminders to hold off until the live demonstration. Control room staff noted her impatience, but the broadcast proceeded as scheduled. As cameras rolled, she transitioned from a local story into casual banter, having just swallowed a bite when her airway suddenly caught. On live television, the accident began without warning. Mid-sentence, her voice broke into a strained wheeze. Her eyes widened, and she froze, one hand moving to her throat. Viewers saw her knock over a coffee mug as she staggered sideways, panic evident. Her co-anchor reached across the desk, slapping her on the back, but the obstruction remained. Within less than a minute, her legs buckled and she collapsed, toppling her chair with a crash. The control room erupted in chaos. Floor crew rushed onto set, shouting for emergency services as the station abruptly cut to commercial after nearly 20 seconds of live struggle. On the studio floor, producers attempted the Heimlich maneuver multiple times. Witnesses recalled her nails scraping the table as she convulsed, her complexion turning dusky blue. Staff tilted her forward, trying to clear her airway, but the blockage held. Paramedics arrived within minutes using suction and advanced airway equipment. Despite intervention, the obstruction remained sealed. She was transported to a nearby hospital but pronounced dead shortly after arrival. Medical examiners later confirmed a dense piece of deli meat had completely lodged in her trachea, cutting off airflow. Her funeral drew family, but only a handful of co-workers. Many declined to attend, citing grievances over her treatment of colleagues. The service was subdued, reflecting a career marked more by friction than friendship. The station issued a brief statement of condolence and immediately pulled the archived segment from circulation. It was June 18, 2016 in Austin, Texas. The Midsummer Festival was packed with families crowding the streets and local television crews moving between camera points to prepare for the evening broadcast. The night was clear after earlier storms had delayed events, and while the festival looked lively and controlled on screen, behind the stage, rushed work and overlooked safety margins set the conditions for a fatal mistake. Thomas Reed, 28, was a freelance stage rigger hired through a small production company contracted for the broadcast. He had years of experience setting up truss systems, lights, and support lines, but had a reputation for saying yes to last-minute calls, even when conditions weren't ideal. Colleagues knew him as precise, though his willingness to bend to production pressures often left him working without full preparation. Freelancers like him rarely had the luxury of refusing work, especially when tied to high-visibility broadcasts, where networks and sponsors demanded speed over caution. Stage rigging is inherently dangerous. Heavy lighting units suspended overhead, fire cues positioned around tightly packed equipment, and live performers moving close to unsecured hazards. It relies on exact placement and spacing, especially when pyrotechnics are added. Even small errors in distance between mortars and flammable rigging increase the risk of catastrophic failure. That night, Reed had been called in to reposition lines after weather delays compressed the setup schedule. Checks that should have taken an hour were condensed into minutes, leaving little margin for oversight. The segment he worked on was particularly hazardous. A local TV affiliate had scheduled a live fireworks cue as part of the show finale, a risky choice given the proximity to stage equipment. Crew members later admitted the pyrotechnic checks were cut short, with a mortar placed only a few feet from overhead rigging to accommodate the camera's street angle. Festival organizers had already pushed the timing back, and the decision was made to move ahead despite warnings from 2 technicians that spacing was tight. With the crowd already in place and live airtime approaching, the call to proceed was locked in. Eyewitnesses recalled Reed pacing near the edge of the stage, adjusting a line that ran across the truss frame above the fireworks setup. A technician off-frame called ready, and the first shells launched successfully, rising clean into the night. As the second was triggered, it misfired, igniting partially inside the launch tube. Cameras caught the resulting flare and shower of sparks that spread across the lower stage area, where Reed was working just feet from the ignition point. The misfire sent sparks and burning fragments across the platform, scorching nearby rigging and striking equipment. A sound technician later described fragments of casing and burning debris, some large enough to fill a hand, raining down as the truss ignited. Reed was struck by shrapnel in the chest and face and caught in the shower of sparks. His figure was visibly collapsing as others rushed forward. Crew members scrambled through sparks and heat, some calling for emergency, while 2 men pulled Reed's limp body from the hazard zone. His clothing and harness smoked heavily, and his exposed skin was blackened and blistering. He was still breathing when medics arrived, though barely responsive. They secured his airway with intubation and began aggressive fluid resuscitation before transport. Emergency responders administered immediate care before transporting him to a regional hospital. By then, Reed had sustained 3rd-degree burns over much of his torso, blunt trauma from the impact of the fragments, and inhalation injuries. He was pronounced dead the following day after repeated efforts to stabilize him failed. The aftermath played out unevenly. The pyrotechnics vendor was cited and fined, but no charges stuck. The affiliate quietly ended live fireworks segments, though without a public announcement, and city officials pushed new permitting requirements that most festival organizers only reluctantly adopted. For Reed's parents, the investigation meant little. The final report reduced their son to crew member fatally injured, a line item in a binder that marked how the show had gone wrong. It was November 8, 2016, in Nairobi, Kenya. The local news station's Westlands headquarters was packed with guests, contributors, and staff rushing between cameras during election night coverage. The broadcast gave the appearance of controlled energy, but behind the glass doors, poor security planning and an unchecked flow of visitors left the building exposed. Daniel Mwangi, 22, worked as a freelance camera assistant and part-time studio driver. He had been with the station only a few months, running feeds, helping with deliveries, and occasionally assisting with setup. Colleagues described him as reliable and eager, someone who accepted extra tasks without complaint in hopes of landing steadier work. His income was modest, but the job gave him connections in production, and he wanted to prove himself. Friends knew he took risks less out of recklessness than out of a desire to be noticed in a competitive field. Broadcast environments like this rely on layered security, controlled access points, credential checks, and monitoring in lobbies where live guests and volunteers gather. When those measures break down, the open floor plan becomes a liability. Election night added further strain. The station had multiple live feeds running simultaneously, extra chairs and cameras cluttering the atrium, and fewer guards than scheduled because of a staffing error. The lobby became a bottleneck with hurried movement, live mics nearby, and no reliable control over who entered. That night's broadcast was already running tight. Visitors passed through quickly, with reception distracted by constant arrivals. Crew recalled noticing a visibly agitated man outside earlier, arguing with a political contributor. Rather than increase caution, the pace of coverage pushed staff to focus on keeping the program moving. No additional security was brought in. The man later entered the lobby unchecked, shouting as he surged past the desk. Eyewitnesses remembered the sharp crack as glass splintered when the man fired a shot into the ceiling. Panic spread as volunteers ducked behind chairs and producers scrambled toward the stage. The shooter's second discharge hit near the ground, scattering debris. In the middle of the atrium, Daniel, carrying a coil of coax cable, moved with 2 other crew members toward the man in a split-second decision to intervene. Daniel lunged in, briefly grabbing the man's arm in an attempt to disrupt him while another crew member tried to force him backward. A violent struggle followed. The shooter twisted free. A muzzle flash briefly illuminated the atrium, and witnesses saw Daniel collapsing. The round struck his torso at close range. Chaos followed, crew pulling back, fire alarms blaring, and guests pressed against walls as staff pulled the injured away from the attacker's reach. Producers stopped the live segment mid-broadcast, cutting abruptly to off-site coverage while alarms echoed in the background. Paramedics arrived within minutes after being called by the staff. They performed chest compressions in the lobby before transporting him. He was admitted in critical condition, but died shortly after from severe internal hemorrhage from a gunshot to the torso. The shooter was restrained by officers outside the building less than 5 minutes later. Daniel's courage left an immediate imprint on his colleagues. Fellow production workers shared stories of his split-second decision to shield others, and a memorial wall was set up at the station with notes, photographs, and equipment he had used. His family took solace in seeing the community recognize his bravery, turning mourning into a narrative of courage and lasting impact. It was August 17, 2017, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The morning was clear, and inside the downtown television studio, producers hurried to finalize the day's live broadcast. On the schedule was a wildlife education segment featuring a python, an animal considered safe under routine handling but unpredictable in the heat and noise of a studio. Daniel Park, 31, was a volunteer animal technician from a small regional wildlife center. He had spent years working with reptiles in controlled habitats, feeding, cleaning, and assisting with veterinary checks. Only recently had he begun stepping into public demonstrations, encouraged by the center's outreach staff. By temperament, he was mild and methodical, someone who trusted routine over improvisation. His motivation was straightforward: raising awareness to secure more donors for the struggling facility. He was not reckless, but he often bent to requests from hosts and producers to make the animals seem more engaging. Non-venomous pythons, though not dangerous under proper management, are powerful constrictors. Stress factors like heat, lights, and sudden noise increase the chance of defensive tightening. Standard practice requires 2 trained handlers and a controlled environment, but live television often skipped safeguards for timing and simplicity. That morning, Daniel arrived with a secure crate containing a 6-foot python. The animal was healthy but known to grow restless under overstimulation. The segment was squeezed into a tight window. Producers pushed Daniel to have the snake out quickly and even suggested draping it around an anchor. Hesitant but cooperative, he complied, hoping to preserve the center's relationship with the station. The studio was hotter than expected, with lamps and microphones raising the temperature. Several staffers later recalled how rushed it felt. Daniel knelt to guide the python out, speaking calmly but moving faster than usual. The snake coiled onto his arm at first, but its movements grew sharper. Instead of pausing to settle it, Daniel stepped toward the cameras, following the producer's cue. Control room staff noticed his posture stiffen as the snake wrapped higher across his chest. The first sign of trouble was subtle. His arm tensed as he tried to adjust his grip. Within seconds, the python locked in, wrapping firmly around his torso. On air, the host's expression shifted from a forced smile to alarm as Daniel leaned back, pulling at the coils. Witnesses saw his breath shorten. Assistants rushed in, trying to pry the snake loose, but it tightened further with the commotion. One staffer dialed 911. Cameras briefly captured the struggle before control cut to an emergency slate. Daniel remained upright but visibly strained, his face reddening. Moments later, his knees buckled as the snake compressed his chest. A medic on standby for another segment attempted to intervene, and staff used scissors to partially free him, but Daniel had already collapsed from cardiac arrhythmia caused by oxygen deprivation. Paramedics transported him to a nearby hospital, but he was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The snake was returned unharmed to the wildlife center, placed back into a controlled habitat. The station suspended live animal features, cutting the segment from archives and halting future broadcasts pending review. At the wildlife center, the tragedy prompted an overhaul of outreach. Live demonstrations were limited to pre-recorded segments, with a veterinarian or senior technician mandated for handling. It was September 9, 2018, in San Diego, California. The morning sky was clear but carried unpredictable winds at higher altitude. Crowds gathered along the waterfront for a televised promotional air event. Few realized that timing adjustments and hurried decisions would soon turn a spectacle into disaster. Mark Levin, 39, was a freelance aerial camera operator with more than a decade of broadcast experience. He had built his reputation on reliability, moving between regional affiliates and local sponsors. Known for saying yes to last-minute calls, Mark often accepted assignments with little preparation. Though not reckless, he tended to prioritize getting the shot over double-checking safety margins. The airshow contract had come through at the 11th hour, and he agreed without hesitation, motivated by steady pay and the chance to expand his portfolio. Shooting an airshow required specialized placement. Mark was stationed on a scaffolding lift just outside the crowd line, positioned for a clear angle on formations. He carried a stabilized long lens and headset for live direction. The setup gave him unobstructed sight lines, but minimal protection compared to an enclosed tower. Under normal conditions, the risk of debris was remote but not absent, especially with tight formation flying. His headset linked him to the director's booth, ensuring he tracked formations across the skyline. That day's complication came from shifting winds. Pilots were briefed on shear at certain altitudes, complicating precision timing. Instead of delaying, teams agreed to minor adjustments. One pair, under pressure to stay on schedule for broadcast, committed to flying closer than usual. Safety officers flagged the move as unnecessary, but the show proceeded. Mark, focused on the broadcast line, remained in position despite the narrower margin. As the routine began, ground cameras followed smoke trails curving upward. Mark's feed showed cross maneuvers threading against blue sky, and producers cued his angle for the broadcast. Witnesses later said the formations looked rushed, spacing tighter than typical. Tension built as the teams moved into a weaving pattern, their aircraft converging in split-second timing. At the peak of the maneuver, two planes clipped wings. Viewers watching live saw the sudden spray of fragments and one aircraft spiraling down. The crowd gasped as metal and flame streaked across the sky. From the scaffolding, Mark had the direct line of sight. His camera tracked the uncontrolled tumble until wreckage began breaking apart. A broken strut and fuselage panel separated in mid-air, dropping toward the spectator zone. Falling from several hundred feet, the section slammed into Mark's platform with enough force to buckle its frame. Witnesses described a metallic thunderclap as the impact shook the scaffolding violently, throwing him over the guardrail. Crew nearby shouted for help as he fell, striking the ground hard. On the live feed, the screen cut between the anchor's shocked expression and emergency vehicles rushing onto the field. Medics arrived within moments, but Mark had sustained fatal trauma. He was pronounced dead at the scene, alongside two pilots who perished in the crash. His equipment lay twisted and broken, the lens shattered on the pavement. The station suspended live aerial coverage indefinitely, not just as a procedural step, but as acknowledgement of the risks their crews faced. Staff who witnessed the crash organized internal safety reviews, rewriting procedures for camera placement and platform stability. It was June 17, 2015, in Seattle, Washington. A bright summer morning framed a television studio's outdoor set, where crews rushed to prepare for a segment of a home improvement program. The scene felt routine, but beneath it lay a structural flaw, an error that would not forgive even a moment of wait. Jerry Mills, 45, was a contractor with 2 decades of remodeling experience. He ran a small business serving mostly residential clients and had built a reputation as a no-nonsense worker who finished jobs quickly. Off camera, colleagues described him as brash and sometimes careless, but audiences liked his energy and plain explanations. He had become a regular guest on the program, a way to generate business and remain visible in a crowded market. Promoted as a trusted expert, he thrived on the attention. Construction for television differed from real jobs. Instead of months, he had minutes to show a process. Producers wanted speed, visuals, and minimal dead time. Jerry worked with standard carpentry tools and fasteners, but instead of a house frame, he often demonstrated on temporary stages dressed to look authentic. Time pressures meant corners were cut, but he believed he could handle the risks. For him, exposure outweighed hesitation. That day's segment involved a simulated backyard deck installation. Producers had ordered a raised platform to serve as the demonstration surface. The structure was built quickly by stagehands, not carpenters, and its stability relied on several adjustable jacks beneath the frame. One jack looked stable at first but was not fully seated, creating a weakness that showed only when weight shifted onto the outer corner. No inspection was scheduled, and the problem went unnoticed. The audience sat less than 10 feet away, and there was no second rehearsal. Jerry arrived with his tool belt, ready to demonstrate how a ledger board connected to a wall frame. He stepped to the platform's outer corner, which carried the hidden fault. The host introduced him as cameras rolled, the crowd of about 40 applauding. The atmosphere looked polished and safe, yet the corner under him flexed more than expected. As he hammered the first nails, a sharp crack cut through the air. Witnesses saw the platform shift and sag toward the audience. The sound escalated into a snap, and the corner dropped suddenly. Jerry lost balance, falling forward as the structure collapsed beneath him. The drop was only 3 feet, but he struck his chest against a concrete prop before his head hit another edge. Live cameras caught everything. The anchor's expression freezing, audience members shouting, crew running into frame. Stage assistants rushed to pull a tarp across the scene while others called emergency responders. Jerry still moved, but his breathing was shallow, blood marking the side of his head. Paramedics arrived within minutes and transferred him to Harborview Medical Center. Despite treatment, he was pronounced dead later that evening. The aftermath centered on a wrongful death suit filed by Jerry's family against the network and its contractors. It alleged that the platform had been assembled without inspection, and that safety was sacrificed for production speed. The settlement was undisclosed, but the program soon disappeared from schedules, a quiet acknowledgement of liability without public admission. It was July 23, 2016, when 29-year-old meteorologist Paige Donovan made a decision that would cost her everything. Known throughout the weather station as fearless and ambitious, Paige had built her reputation over 6 years by going where other forecasters wouldn't dare. Her colleagues often joked that she chased storms like others chased dreams, but on this sweltering Arizona evening, that fearlessness would prove fatal. For 3 days, Paige had been tracking what she believed would be the summer's most significant thunderstorm system, approaching Phoenix. The massive cell promised to deliver the kind of dramatic footage that separated good meteorologists from great ones. While her competitors played it safe with indoor coverage, Paige saw opportunity in the approaching danger. The weather station's observation deck had been her target location all afternoon. Despite her producer's initial refusal, Paige's persuasive arguments about capturing competitor-beating footage eventually won approval. The covered deck, surrounded by metal railings and equipment housing, offered the perfect vantage point to showcase the storm's raw power. Perched on the 10th floor of the downtown broadcast tower, it gave Paige an unobstructed view of the city skyline and a dangerously exposed position once the storm drew closer. What nobody realized was that the building's grounding system, installed decades earlier, no longer met modern safety standards. As evening approached, Paige positioned herself on the deck with her camera operator. The storm system, initially 8 miles away, began moving faster than meteorological models had predicted. Lightning flickered in the distance like nature's own strobe lights, each flash bringing the danger closer to the downtown station. Then everything changed in an instant. A lightning bolt struck the building's antenna array with devastating force. The inadequate grounding system failed catastrophically. Instead of safely directing the electricity into the ground, the current found alternative pathways through the metal infrastructure surrounding Page's position. Although the building's surge protection system had been installed years earlier, its corroded grounding cables couldn't safely channel the lightning's residual current, allowing electricity to arc unpredictably through the structure. The electrical surge traveled through the metal railings and equipment housing, creating a deadly electrical field across the observation deck. Page, standing near the metal railing while gesturing toward the approaching storm, became an unwitting conductor in nature's most violent electrical display. The moment her hands contacted the electrified railing, a residual current estimated at around 7,000 volts coursed through her body, energy redirected through the metal structure rather than from the lightning's full charge. The electricity entered through her hands and exited through her feet, following the path of least resistance through her vital organs. Her heart couldn't withstand the surge and stopped beating immediately. The electrical shock caused instant cardiac arrest and respiratory paralysis, effects typical in lightning electrocution. Page collapsed unconsciously within seconds, severe electrical burns marking the entry and exit points where the current had traveled. The same electrical surge that killed her also damaged the camera equipment, cutting the live broadcast feed and leaving viewers staring at static screens. The surge also overwhelmed the studio's surge protectors, frying the transmission relays that linked the broadcast tower to the studio feed. Emergency responders reached the weather station within minutes. They found Page in full cardiac arrest, her body bearing the telltale signs of electrical trauma. Despite immediate CPR and advanced life support measures, her heart had sustained irreversible electrical damage. At the Regional Trauma Center, medical teams fought desperately to restart her heart, but the electrical injury had been too severe. The same lightning that Page had spent her career studying had ultimately claimed her life through a tragic combination of aging infrastructure and split-second timing. It was March 15, 2017, when 34-year-old field reporter Tristan Cole arrived at what would become his final assignment. With 11 years of experience covering local news and construction stories, Tristan had built a reputation as a thorough journalist who wasn't afraid to get close to the action. His colleagues respected his dedication to capturing the human side of every story, but on this windy morning, that commitment would prove fatal. The assignment seemed routine enough, covering the topping-out ceremony of a new residential building downtown. The 12-story apartment complex represented a significant addition to the neighborhood, and Tristan had specifically requested the story because of his experience in construction reporting. Before setting up, Tristan signed in at the site office, collected a visitor's badge, and was given a brief safety orientation, a routine step on any active construction site. He was required to wear a hard hat and reflective vest, though his camera operator noted Tristan tended to inch closer than most reporters would for a better shot. The construction site buzzed with activity as crews prepared for the ceremonial placement of the final beam. Tristan positioned himself strategically to get the best angles, despite safety personnel warning him about staying within designated areas. The veteran reporter had covered dozens of local construction projects and felt confident in his ability to judge safe distances from heavy machinery. What concerned the construction supervisors that morning were the unusual wind conditions. Gusts were reaching 35 miles per hour, pushing the limits of safe crane operation. However, with media present and schedules to maintain, the decision was made to proceed with the ceremony as planned. The tower crane, a 15-year-old workhorse that had passed its recent inspection, stood ready to hoist the final 2-ton steel beam, the ceremonial topping-out piece, into position. Under normal circumstances, crane operations are suspended when sustained winds exceed 30 miles per hour or gusts reach 40 miles per hour. The site's safety officer had mentioned it was near that threshold, but the presence of local officials and media created subtle pressure to move forward anyway. Unknown to anyone on site, maintenance logs had documented hydraulic fluid leaks in the boom assembly over the past month. Temporary repairs had been made, but full hydraulic replacements were deferred until project completion. The subcontracted maintenance team had documented the issue, but flagged it as non-critical, meaning repairs could wait as long as hydraulic pressure remained stable. With tight deadlines and penalty clauses looming, management chose to monitor the leak rather than halt operations. The combination of aging equipment, compromised hydraulics, and extreme weather conditions was creating a perfect storm of mechanical failure. Tristan began his live broadcast, interviewing the project foreman about construction milestones. The camera crew set up roughly 60 feet from the crane's base, outside the marked exclusion zone. But during live coverage, Tristan instinctively stepped forward to frame the crane better behind him, crossing into the restricted area by only a few meters. His enthusiasm was evident as he described the local development rising behind him, unaware that he was standing within the crane's potential fall radius. The ceremony commenced with the crane operator beginning the delicate process of lifting the steel beam. As the load rose toward the building's summit, a sudden wind gust of 42 miles per hour struck the extended boom. The additional lateral force, combined with the heavy load, created stresses that the compromised hydraulic system simply couldn't handle. The sudden gust introduced a side load the crane's jib wasn't designed to resist. The slewing ring, which allows the boom to rotate, seized under the strain. A moment later, the entire upper section sheared off its turntable connection, sending the boom and cab hurtling downward. Tristan heard the loud metallic grinding and looked up to see the steel structure plummeting directly toward his position. Despite his quick reflexes and attempt to run, the laws of physics were unforgiving. The boom struck him within 1.5 seconds, crushing him instantly against the concrete ground. The grinding sound lasted less than a heartbeat, just enough for Tristan to glance upward. Witnesses later recalled him starting to move before the steel blurred into his frame. At that height, the falling section hit the ground in under 2 seconds. The impact was so severe that death was instantaneous. The crushing trauma to his head, chest, and spine left no possibility of survival. Construction workers who witnessed the accident stood in shocked silence, unable to comprehend how quickly the routine ceremony had turned into tragedy. The live feed froze mid-sentence, leaving viewers staring at an empty frame before the broadcast abruptly cut to black. It was September 8, 2015, when 31-year-old traffic reporter Mara Jennings climbed into what would be her final helicopter ride. With 8 years of aerial broadcasting experience, Mara had become the calm voice that Los Angeles commuters relied on during their daily battles with gridlock. Known for her unflappable demeanor during chaotic traffic situations, she had earned respect throughout the industry for her professionalism and dedication to keeping drivers safe. That Tuesday morning promised to be particularly challenging for LA's notorious traffic patterns. A freeway construction project along one of the city's main interstate routes was causing unprecedented delays, backing up traffic for miles. Mara had specifically requested the early morning shift to provide comprehensive coverage of what transportation officials were calling the worst construction-related congestion in the city's history. The news helicopter lifted off from its downtown helipad as dawn broke over the sprawling metropolis. Mara settled into her familiar position, headset adjusted and notes organized, ready to guide millions of commuters through another day of urban navigation. What she didn't know was that her aircraft had been experiencing intermittent radio communication issues for 3 days, forcing her pilot to rely more heavily on visual navigation. As the helicopter climbed to its standard reporting altitude of 1,000 feet above the congested freeway corridor, air traffic control was noting an unusually busy morning in the skies. 5 news helicopters and 2 police aircraft were operating in the same general airspace, all drawn to cover the massive traffic disruption. The convergence of so many aircraft was creating a complex aerial dance that required precise coordination. The danger began building when a competing station's helicopter approached from the east, also seeking the best vantage point to cover the same massive traffic incident. Both aircraft were operating at similar altitudes, drawn to the most dramatic visual representation of the morning's transportation crisis. The pilots were experienced professionals, but the combination of heavy air traffic and compromised radio communications was creating a potentially deadly situation. As Mara continued her live broadcast, describing alternate routes and estimated delay times, her pilot initiated a banking turn to maintain safe separation from the approaching aircraft. Standard aviation protocols required clear radio coordination, yet Mara's helicopter's faulty transceiver caused heavy static, blocking an advisory warning about nearby aircraft convergence. The collision happened with terrifying suddenness. The tail rotor of the competing helicopter struck the main rotor assembly of Mara's aircraft, sending shards of rotor blades and fragments scattering through the air. Both helicopters immediately lost their ability to maintain controlled flight, entering rapid descents that would end in tragedy. Mara's helicopter, having lost its main rotor completely, fell approximately 1,100 feet in seconds. The aircraft struck the concrete freeway median at high speed, causing immediate structural collapse that killed both occupants instantly from massive impact trauma. The crash resulted in an immediate fuel fire that engulfed both aircraft wreckage. The same traffic jam that Mara had been reporting on became the backdrop for her final moments, as emergency responders struggled to reach the crash site through the very congestion she had dedicated her career to helping others navigate. It was October 14th, 2017, when 28-year-old sports reporter Damon Ellis arrived at what would become his final assignment. With 5 years of experience covering college athletics, Damon had built a reputation as an energetic journalist who brought genuine enthusiasm to every game he covered. His colleagues knew him as someone who always went the extra mile to capture the perfect shot. But on this homecoming Saturday in Texas, that dedication would prove fatal. The assignment was covering the homecoming game between two fierce rival universities. The atmosphere was electric, with alumni returning to campus and students preparing for what promised to be one of the most exciting games of the season. Damon had specifically requested this assignment because of his expertise in college sports and his ability to capture the raw emotion that made these rivalries compelling. Arriving 3 hours before kickoff, Damon was determined to create comprehensive coverage that would showcase the entire homecoming experience. He had convinced his producer to let him broadcast from a temporary platform erected in the stadium's upper deck, arguing that the elevated position would provide spectacular crowd shots and give viewers a unique perspective. The stadium was a 40-year-old concrete structure that had hosted countless games over the decades. While maintenance crews had noted some structural concerns with the upper deck during routine inspections, the facility had been cleared for normal use. The temporary broadcast platform had been installed by a subcontractor using mounting points that appeared secure, but had not been properly load tested for the additional weight of broadcast equipment. The subcontractor had reused decades-old anchor bolts embedded in weathered concrete, unaware that years of corrosion had weakened their grip. The crowd's synchronized chants amplified the structural vibrations, matching the platform's natural frequency, a phenomenon engineers call resonance, which rapidly accelerated the loosening. As game time approached, the stadium began filling with an enthusiastic crowd that would eventually reach near capacity, with tens of thousands of spectators packing the stands. The energy was palpable as fans streamed into their seats wearing team colors. Damon positioned himself on the platform with his camera operator, excited about the dramatic footage they would capture. Damon began his live pre-game show, interviewing alumni and describing the incredible atmosphere building around him. His enthusiasm was infectious as he painted a picture of college football at its finest, with passionate fans creating an environment that epitomized amateur athletics. The mounting bolts had been installed to standard specifications, but the sustained crowd vibrations were producing stresses the setup was never meant to withstand. The rhythmic movement was gradually loosening the connections, creating a dangerous situation that nobody could detect. Damon noticed the platform beginning to sway slightly, but assumed it was normal movement from crowd activity. He had worked from temporary structures before and trusted that proper safety protocols had been followed. His focus remained on delivering compelling coverage, unaware that the platform's structural integrity was rapidly deteriorating. The failure happened without warning. The mounting bolts suddenly gave way completely, causing the entire platform to separate from its attachment points. Damon and 800 pounds of broadcast equipment began falling 85 feet toward the concrete concourse below. The fall lasted only 2.3 seconds. He struck the concrete surface with tremendous force, suffering immediate fatal head trauma and instant death. It was December 12, 2017, when 26-year-old field reporter Caroline Mercer made the choice that would define her final broadcast. With 4 years of experience covering natural disasters throughout Southern California, Caroline had built a reputation as a dedicated journalist who never backed down from dangerous assignments. Her colleagues admired her unwavering commitment to telling important stories. But on this windy December afternoon in Southern California's foothills, that fearless dedication would prove fatal. The assignment was covering mandatory evacuations in a mountain community threatened by a rapidly spreading wildfire that had already consumed 12,000 acres of drought-stricken terrain. The fire was being driven by powerful Santa Ana winds that were pushing the flames toward residential areas with unprecedented speed and intensity. had positioned herself at a residential evacuation checkpoint to interview fleeing residents and document the emergency response efforts. The checkpoint was strategically located on a mountain road that served as the primary escape route for hundreds of families whose homes lay directly in the fire's projected path. Her news van was equipped with emergency communication equipment, but the mountainous terrain had been causing intermittent radio contact. Fire officials had been warning all media personnel that shifting wind patterns could change the fire's direction rapidly and without warning. The Santa Ana winds were notorious for their unpredictability, capable of turning a controlled situation into a life-threatening emergency within minutes. Despite these warnings, Caroline insisted on remaining in the area to provide comprehensive coverage. As the afternoon progressed, Caroline conducted interviews with evacuating families, capturing their fear and determination as they fled their homes. Her reporting was compelling and human, showing viewers the real impact of natural disasters. The evacuation checkpoint buzzed with activity as emergency vehicles guided residents to safety. The wind patterns that had been stable throughout the morning began shifting dramatically. What had been a predictable fire suddenly became an unpredictable monster, driven by 45-mile-per-hour Santa Ana winds. The fire's advancement speed increased from 1 mile per hour to a terrifying 3 miles per hour, with flames reaching heights of 40 feet and temperatures exceeding 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Fire officials immediately announced that all personnel needed to evacuate the checkpoint area, as the wind shift had put the location directly in the fire's new path. Caroline received the evacuation order, but chose to continue broadcasting as she moved toward her news van, hoping to capture footage of the approaching fire front. The superheated air ahead of the flames created an environment that was lethal even before the fire itself arrived. Temperatures soared above survivable levels, while toxic smoke filled the air, making breathing impossible. Caroline suffered severe smoke inhalation as the oxygen was consumed by the approaching inferno, followed by third-degree burns over 85% of her body as the fire engulfed her position. The intense fire conditions prevented emergency responders from reaching her location for 47 minutes. When firefighters finally found her, Caroline had succumbed to smoke inhalation and thermal injuries. It was January 19, 2018, when 33-year-old field reporter Jared Fulton arrived at what would become his final assignment. With 9 years of experience covering severe weather events across the Midwest, Jared had built a reputation as one of the most thorough and safety-conscious reporters in the region. His colleagues respected his meticulous preparation and professional approach to dangerous weather coverage. But on this frigid Oklahoma evening, even his careful nature couldn't protect him from a tragic miscommunication. The assignment was covering a historic ice storm that had left widespread power outages and created hazardous conditions throughout the Oklahoma City metropolitan area. Ice accumulation had reached unprecedented levels, with some areas reporting over 3 inches of ice coating on trees, power lines, and roadways. The freezing rain had also disabled several cellular towers, forcing emergency crews to rely on spotty radio communication and handwritten reports. The storm had battered the region for 2 days, turning it into a landscape as beautiful as it was deadly. Jared had positioned himself in a residential neighborhood to document the ice accumulation and interview residents who were coping with extended power outages in sub-freezing temperatures. The location seemed ideal. It offered dramatic visuals of ice-laden trees and allowed him to showcase the storm's impact on ordinary families. What he didn't know was that utility records for the area were incomplete due to storm-related communication failures between repair crews. Utility crews had been working around the clock to restore power, battling ice accumulation and the continuous threat of falling tree branches weighted down with ice. Power lines that crews believed had been de-energized were sometimes still carrying dangerous electrical current due to incomplete documentation during the chaotic restoration efforts. As evening approached, Jared began setting up for his live broadcast near what appeared to be a safe location away from major power lines. The scene around him was both beautiful and ominous, trees bent under the weight of ice, creating a crystalline landscape that sparkled under the streetlights. The temperature had dropped to 18 degrees Fahrenheit. Jared began his live evening broadcast, standing near the ice-covered trees to demonstrate the storm's dramatic impact on the residential area. His report was informative and compelling, showing viewers the real challenges that residents face during extended power outages in dangerous winter conditions. He described the beauty and danger of the ice accumulation while maintaining his professional demeanor. The catastrophic failure happened without warning. The oak tree branch, no longer able to support the massive weight of accumulated ice, cracked completely and began falling toward the ground. The branch struck a power line that utility crews had incorrectly believed was disconnected from the electrical grid. The line was still energized by a nearby substation after automatic grid rerouting minutes earlier. The impact caused the power line to snap and fall directly onto Jared, who was standing 8 feet away and had no time to react. The 13,200-volt electrical current caused immediate cardiac arrest as it entered his body through his shoulder and exited through his leg. Witnesses saw a brilliant blue-white arc flash as the wire contacted his shoulder, momentarily illuminating the ice-covered scene. The electrical shock killed him instantly. Emergency responders arrived within 12 minutes, but found that death had been instantaneous. The live broadcast captured the entire incident before the camera operator shut down the equipment. Jared was pronounced dead at the scene from electrical cardiac arrest. Thanks for watching. Want to see more? Click on your screen now.